Hello, everyone. So, to Missan 16, yes, it did start. Um, I think the reason for the delay a lot of you people have perceived is that is essentially that in America we have something called daylight saving time. So our clocks are shifted by an hour, and I don't think Ustream took that into account, and so we started. So it's currently 9 a.m. in the morning for me, and it's probably an hour later than the time you assumed it would be for you guys. So we apologize for that error. It was super unintentional. Um, Hopefully you're all still here and we can get this started. So just as a preliminary sort of thing, is this the SSOD? No. So none of these webinars are committee specific. Okay, so this webinar is just here to tell you how to be a great crisis or GA delegate. So to introduce myself, my name is Vatsal Jayaswal, and I was born in California in America. And when I was 8 years old, I moved to India, and I lived in India for 10 years, and then I got into Penn and I moved back here. And when I was in India, I did tons of Model UN, tons of it. I started in seventh standard and just kept going until 12th grade. And I attended ILMUNC India as a high schooler. So I was just like one of you guys. I was in the International Maritime Organization. I was incredibly nervous, but I had a great time and I loved Penn. And well, it turns out I'm back today as a chair. So again, to the people who are asking if this is SSOD or Ecosoc, it's just a so this is Ecosoc. I'm the chair of the UNPF, and this isn't a specifically committee related webinar though. This is just general advice. So, um, so how to be a good GA or Ecosoc delegate? It's certainly not easy. Um, there are three primary ways you can differentiate yourselves. There are moderated caucuses, the general speakers list, and unmods. And moderated caucuses are where the bulk of the speaking is done. They're essentially they're essentially the entire committee sits down and raises their placards and asks the chair for an opportunity to speak by raising their placards, and the chair calls on people, and the people who he calls on get to speak and give speeches in a designated time frame. The other main way that you can speak to the committee is via the general speakers list, which is just a long list of almost every single delegate that proceeds throughout the course of the committee. And one by one, every single delegate goes up and gives a long speech about the general agenda at hand. Now, the difference between moderated caucuses and general speakers lists is that a moderated caucus is on a specific topic within the agenda, whereas a general speakers list is something general about the agenda. It's a lot broader than any moderated caucuses is. Now, the other way that you can be the other opportunity you get to be a great GA delegate is via unmoderated caucuses, which are basically when the entire committee just isn't moderated, as the name suggests, by the chair. They just get up and talk to each other within the committee, and the aim of this is for all the delegates to speak to each other and collaboratively work on a resolution together, which is just a document which encompasses every single solution you can think of. Now, you have to be a good delegate in speeches, like the moderated caucuses and the GSL, and and you have to be good at writing and lobbying and convincing other delegates of your ideas in unmoderated caucuses. So, to be a good delegate in committee, in moderated and general speaking sort of things, you have to speak clearly and concisely. You can't stutter or pause or go off topic. You have to develop a solidly framed and overall just really well executed speech, and try to encompass all your ideas and speak with force and convince the rest of the committee, and make sure that when you're giving a speech in committee, the rest of the committee gets up and notices you. And when they do, and when the committee notices you in general speakers lists and moderated caucus speeches, in the unmoderated caucuses, they will come to you because they will view you as a leader. And it's going to be a lot easier to lobby your ideas and help get a resolution passed. So, one question is how to make such a speech in 5 minutes. A lot of the times, GSLs are actually, so the general speakers list is a lot less than 5 minutes. It's probably going to be about 2 minutes of speech. And moderated caucuses are even shorter. They're 1 minute to 45 seconds to even 30 seconds per speech. So, that's a great question, Ritesh. How would we make a good speech in just 5 minutes? So I'd recommend being as concise as possible. You don't want to add any extra details to your speech. It's great if you know additional facts or details, but what you want to do is convey the meat of your speech without going off topic at all. You want to speak. So one way to do it would be to pack your speech with details and then speak super quickly. That's probably not a good idea. You want to go slowly, and you want to be forceful, and you want to make sure that the rest of the committee can understand you. But you also want to fill your time limit. So the one thing you have to sacrifice is detail. Don't don't go into too much detail, and just try to, and when you're wording a sentence, just try to word it as efficiently as possible. It's pretty difficult. Now, a question: when is the special session on drugs? That's actually in an hour. So that's at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So it's currently, what time is it Indian Standard Time? Let me check. Indian Standard Time. It's currently 7:33 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So the special session on drugs is going to be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. This is currently just a description of how to be a good delegate in GAs or Ecosocs, and a lot of this advice is also applicable to crisis committees, but it's more specifically for GAs or Ecosocs. Alright, so are there any other questions? I'm just going to open up this webinar to questions. There are 56 minutes left in this webinar, just to be specific. So if you have anything you want to ask, anything at all, go ahead and ask it. Again, the session on drugs is in about 56 minutes at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, or 8:30 p.m. your time. Yep, that's correct, Bravo QD, which is a nice name. Okay. Is it important to make a position paper? Well, that depends on your committee. If a committee does require a position paper, I would say it certainly is important. They are read. ILMUNC India. So certain committees don't actually have position papers, but when they do, they're a very effective point of reference for you to know your committee's, for you to know your country's stance on the committee's agenda, and it's just easy to quickly refer to it and make sure that what you're doing isn't dramatically against what your country wants. So, for example, if you're Japan and you're in a committee that deals with nuclear weapons, you obviously don't want to support the proliferation of nuclear weapons because Japan as a country has been historically very, very against nuclear weaponry because of the tragedies that happened during World War II. So, and chairs always appreciate when a delegate plays the role of a delegate appropriately. So like you guys are students, but you're pretending to be delegates, and we want you to pretend accurately, right? So we want to be convinced that you're actually that you're actually and that you're an actual delegate of that country for that agenda. So you want to represent your country accurately as possible. So, another question. Is decorated language appreciated on the GSL? So, in general, in Model UN, your main purpose is to convince people that you have good ideas. And so you want to convince your chair that you have great ideas, and you want to convince the other delegates that you have good ideas. So if you use overly formal or like flowery speech in your speeches, well, to an extent, it's all right. But if you use too much of it, the other delegates don't really relate to you as much. So you want them to think of you as that guy with the great ideas, as opposed to, say, the guy who knows a lot of big words, but I can't really understand his ideas or relate to him. People want to view you want to be viewed as like a friendly, approachable person who delegates can go to in an unmoderated caucus and write a resolution with, or back or back verbally in moderated caucuses. So I'd recommend I'd recommend keeping your language formal and polite, but not necessarily flowery or using like extraneous words that are just like overly like loquacious. Okay. Another question is, okay, so again, the special session on drugs chair will be holding a webinar at 8:30 Indian Standard Time, which is 10 a.m. my time. It's the morning here, so that's that. So in a crisis committee, will there be general speakers list? So the purpose, there might be, okay? There might be, to answer your question. But the purpose of a general speakers list is to give everybody in a very large committee a chance to talk and like give their general understanding of the agenda. In a crisis committee, it's a lot more important for delegates to respond to like the immediate crisis at hand as opposed to talk about the topic in general. So, in a crisis committee, there might be GSLs, but they're going to be a lot less important because the committee is very tiny, so everyone's probably going to get a ton of chances to speak, and you won't need a GSL to make sure that like you get that 1 minute of FaceTime with your committee. And they're also going to be less important since talking about your agenda isn't the important thing, since a crisis committee deals with like immediate crises that have to be solved or bad things will happen. So overall there might be, but like they're just not quite as important as GA GSLs or Ecosoc GSLs. So, another question. Could you tell us what would be there in the working paper? And another question says, can you please explain the role of a working paper? Okay, so what a working paper is it's basically this. The end result of a GA or Ecosoc committee is to come up with is to come up with a fair copy of a resolution. And a resolution is just a formal statement of all the solutions you want. It's just every single thing that you think the committee should do to help solve the issue at hand. Now, obviously, you're not going to jump from the ideas you have in your head straight to a resolution. Now, like you can't carry pre-written resolutions at ILMUNC India. We frown heavily upon that, so please don't do that. You have to come up with your resolution on the spot and like write it together with the other delegates, like during committee. So you obviously can't jump from the ideas in your head to a final fair copy resolution. So what do you do in between? Well, what you do in between is the working paper. It's a less formal document than a resolution, which helps shape what the resolution is going to be. It just documents every single one of your ideas in like informal language. So for example, if I had an idea to solve hunger in Africa, which was, teach kids about the importance of nutrition. In my working paper, I'd write one line. I'd just say, hey, we should teach, so this committee should set up programs to teach children about the importance of nutrition, which is just a simple one-line idea. It's in very informal language. And then over the course of the committee, I would develop that idea into a more fair, more formal sort of clause that I can put in a resolution. So I would make it something like that, like establishes a program to educate children in Namibia, Rwanda, and Uganda about the importance of macro and micronutrients, and then describe what sort of elements of this program would exist. So yeah, so I think the questions here again. So to summarize, what a working paper is just a document informally summarizing your ideas which you'd want to put in a resolution. Okay, so I think we're still getting more questions about working papers. Okay, so I don't know if I was clear or not. I'll just repeat it. I may have gone off into a bit of a tangent. So a resolution is just a formal explanation of your ideas, and a working paper is just a way to develop your ideas using informal language. So a working paper would just be all the ideas in a resolution, but like in informal language. It would just be a rough draft of your resolution. So another question is, when do we need to submit these working papers to the executive board? And Misam 16 asks, when do we prepare the working paper? So you do have to submit these working papers to the executive board, and we'll let you read them out in committee. So that answers that question. A more confusing question could be, when would we need to prepare a working paper? Now, the conference is 4 days, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ideally, we'd like to see completed resolutions before day 4, like at least on the morning of day 4, and we'd want to vote for them on day 4. So you want to make working papers all of day 2 and day 3 of the committee. And in these working papers, you want to develop the ideas that will end up in your resolution. But you can do this in much less formal terms than a resolution. So just think of a working paper as a rough draft of the resolution you have to submit on day 4. So, is that clear? So, another question is, So another question is, should every delegate submit a working paper? And somebody else asks, how are working and position papers different? So every delegate isn't supposed to submit a working paper, and every delegate isn't supposed to submit a resolution. Working papers and resolutions represent the cumulative work of multiple delegates in a committee. There's a single resolution which everybody works like, well, in the entire committee, there are probably going to be like 2 or 3 resolutions formed by different blocks. But within a block, there's going to be one single resolution. And that resolution will be the cumulative effort of the time and like energy and thought of multiple delegates who collaborate to put their solutions together into a single document. And you make working papers and resolutions during the course of the conference. A position paper is, as Peace Forever says, the summary of a country's position on the topic, written by a delegate before a Model UN conference. So it's something. So a position paper is something you make before the conference, and it just details what your country thinks of the topic, or what your character in a crisis committee might feel about the agenda. So that's the essential difference. They're pretty different things. Every delegate has to submit a position paper if it's required for the committee. But every delegate is certainly not expected to submit their own resolution. In fact, we would encourage that delegates collaborate with other delegates and come to a consensus and then build a resolution, as opposed to just like pushing their own ideas and like not taking the input of others. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any further questions? I think a lot of people are asking about when. So just to clarify, this session is going to go on from 7. So this started at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, and it's going to go on till 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, which is 10 a.m. my time. Okay. Further questions? Oh, great. So, sorry, it's very cold here. I'm coughing a lot. So, an anonymous person asks, "Can you tell me good research links?" So, I can't, because research links are something specific to your committee. However, they're obviously specific to your agenda. However, I can give you more specifics, like more general sources as to where you can research. So, if you have an agenda, you want to start with your background guide, and you want to read through that completely, and you want to understand every single line of that, and that's the initial prep you should do for sure. Further research, on the other hand, is less. So further research is as important as reading your background guide. And it's always a question delegates have as to where they should start their further research. So I think a great place for delegates to start is at the end of every background guide, there are citations by the chair, which the chair put there. And these citations are the links that the chair used to write the background guide. They are the source of knowledge for the background guide. So I definitely recommend reading through those if you have further time, because they're obviously things that the chair has read and that the chair deeply cares about, which is why he put them there as sources. For further research, I'd recommend the UN's website, or like any good news agency probably has solid reporting on your topic, right? Like BBC or Reuters or the New York Times will all have pretty interesting, well-written, informative articles on your topic. Your background guide is your Bible, theoretically. Yes, Ritesh. It's a very important document. Um, Another source, which I personally like a lot, are research papers. So, for example, if your topic is something like malnutrition, and you come up with a research paper which has this like technology, this sort of superfood that scientists have created, um, which like which prevents malnutrition, like delivers all the micronutrients and macronutrients that a child would need in like a few bites, for instance, you 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 can pitch that idea to your committee and like recommend that they sponsor it, or that they look into that technology. And I'm pretty sure that people would definitely appreciate ideas like that, like the recommendation of different kinds of technology. So those are sources which I'd recommend. Essentially, your background guide, the citations at the end of your background guide, news articles from like reputable agencies, and research papers for those. All right, further questions. We have two topics on which topic should we prepare a position paper. So if your committee has a position paper and you have two subtopics, like my committee, the UNPF, that has two subtopics, right? They're topic A and topic B. If that happens, you want to write your position paper on both of those. So it's going to be 1 page on each, essentially. I hope that answers your question. So there are a lot of questions like that. Do we need different position papers for different topics? We have two topics. Should we have separate position papers for topics A and B? You should have separate position papers for topics A and B. They should be about 1 page each. If your committee has two agendae, then yes, you do have to write a position paper on both topics. You can't pick one, and you can't just write one position paper which like vaguely touches upon both topics. You want separate ones for each topic. So, someone asked to please explain position papers one more time. Sure. So, what a position paper is it's basically your country's position or your stance on the topic. So, for example, if you were Japan and the topic was nuclear weapons, Japan would write in its position paper that it's highly, highly against the development of nuclear weapons, and that it would support any initiative to dismantle or reverse the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Yes. So, Drish asks, how long can our position papers be? And Peace Forever responds correctly. It's going to be a single side of a paper. That's a lot of dams. Okay. Okay. So, are there any further questions? Let me look through this chat bar and see what people are asking. Shouldn't you be studying for biology? Okay. Flames the internet. How long? When do we? Okay. When or what do we speak? Yes, Ratish is correct. You should never nuke a country 2 times. Okay. So, Flames asks, should a position paper be against or for the topic, mainly? So, that depends on your country, right? So, again, I gave the example of Japan and nuclear weapons. If your country was Japan and your topic was nuclear weapons, your position paper would be very against the topic. If you were, say, India or Pakistan, and or Israel, for instance, and the topic was nuclear weapons, you would go against the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but you would probably support the development of nuclear weapons because, well, India and Pakistan at least have open nuclear weapons programs, and they aren't party to the NPT. So somebody asked, what is a placard? So a placard is essentially this piece of paper that you hold up in committee, which which tells you it's essentially a so yeah so that question's coming up quite a few times. A placard is essentially a piece of paper with the delegate's country on it or the delegate's position on it. And when your chair asks you to raise your placards if you'd like to be recognized and you want to speak, raise your placard and hold it up high, and the chair will call on you in due time. Yep, Peace Forever responds correctly. It's a piece of cardstock with the country's name on it that a delegate raises in the air to signal to the chair that he or she wishes to speak. So, why is it compulsory? Heisenberg, I've already gagged the dude. Why is it compulsory to wear formal clothes? Well, to be honest, I never thought that formal clothes were the most important thing. Like I never really saw why they were super necessary. Um, but see, so Model UN is all about role playing, right? You're pretending to be a delegate, and 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 you aren't a delegate though. You're just a student. So so Western business attire, like formal clothing, like a suit and tie for guys or a skirt and whatever for girls. It helps you get into the spirit of Model UN. You put on the costume, and then and you therefore get into the role of being a delegate, and when you do, you feel the aura that delegates to the actual UN might feel. It just gives a more stately appearance to the entire committee. It helps people focus on what they're here for, and a lot of people find it pretty fun to wear formal clothes. Right? People come to Model UN conferences. Well, at least some people do, just because it's an opportunity to dress up. It's so that's pretty much it. And since Western business attire is a part of Model UN, I would suggest that you should dress very well, because like that's the first impression you make on other delegates. And while the chair probably won't be judging people based on how they dress, because that would be very unfair, um, your other delegates will, and your chair will judge you on how well you can influence the rest of the committee. So that's essentially the response. As Flames 8749 says, formal clothes make you feel awesome when you give the presentation, bro, and they do indeed make you feel awesome. So Atharva 34 asks a very important question. Um, can we interrupt a delegate? So you cannot. No. So in India, a lot of the times, like when I was growing up in India, and I was doing Model UN, a lot of committees allowed people to interrupt other people, like allowed delegates to interrupt other delegates for like factual inaccuracies and like point of order, and you like yell point of order in the middle of their speeches, and point out factual inaccuracies in the delegate speech. We don't do that here. It's not a part of the American circuit at all. And since ILMUNC is essentially based on the American format, it's basically what Model UN is like in America. There, there are no point of orders for factual inaccuracies. Um, you can't interrupt a delegate in his speech at all. And a lot of you might find that different or kind of odd, but you'll learn that it's actually pretty great. Like you can make your speech uninterrupted, and then when somebody has the chance to speak, like on their own time, instead of interrupting the flow of debate, they can just like point out anything another delegate has said or their response to what other delegates have said when they have like when the chair calls upon them, as opposed to like when they when they as opposed to like raising your placard up and screaming point of order. And yes, I did grow up in India. I lived there between the ages of 8 and 18. Okay. Some So, Ritesh asks, what happens if you put your placard upside down? Your chair probably can't read what's written on your placard because committees are big and chairs sit pretty far away. So, upside down placards probably won't work. Let's see. Okay, so could you explain the difference between a point of order and a right to reply? So, okay, and Atharva34 asks, what if a delegate is speaking a wrong fact? So, if a delegate says something incorrect, do not point of order them at ILMUNC India. That is against our procedure. Our procedure is that when you are called upon later in conference, you can say, oh, the delegate of Chile said this. I think that that's wrong because, that's because that's a factual inaccuracy, and the correct answer is this. And I'd not recommend doing that unless it's a very bad factual inaccuracy. Because the chair has probably picked up on it. And the purpose of Model UN is not to point out inaccuracies in what other delegates are saying. It's not to attack other people. It's to come to a consensus and have a good resolution to show at the end of the conference. It's not to point out flaws in what other delegates have said. You want to be as diplomatic as possible. However, if another delegate has made a terrible error and you think that it's like dramatically going to affect the working of the committee, go ahead and point it out in your speech. I'd probably not recommend that because like it really cuts into the time you have to convey your own ideas, and conveying your own ideas is always more appreciated than like shooting other delegates down, especially in a Jeer or Ecosoc where you have very little time because of all the delegates and people barely get recognized. So so KV1711 asks, could you explain the difference between a point of order and a right to reply? So a point of order, at least in ILMUNC India, is used for procedural errors, and like I'd recommend that you not use them at all. Like they're never really useful, at least in the American format, which is what we follow. But a right to reply is something that like, so if another delegate insults your country or you as a person in your speech, you can raise your placard and say right to reply, and then and you will then get a chance to like list out why you feel that what the delegate said was unfair and how it offended you and why it was offensive and like a personal attack on your country or yourself, and why it was something that was like not parliamentary. And when you do that, and that's why you raise a right to reply, so you can point out something extremely offensive that the delegate has said to you. So if you yeah, so the right to reply is used if your country has been, if the integrity of your country has been violated. So Misan16 asks, "You are an Indian, right?" That's not really relevant, but yeah. I'm ethnically Indian, and I lived in India for like 10 years. I was born in America though, and I currently live there. So, is it important to get our information from the Amnesty website? So, if you're referring to Amnesty, so are you referring to Amnesty country reports, like like the profiles of countries on amnesty.com, amnesty.org? Because if you're referring to those, it's not essential that you get information on your country from those profiles. There are tons of other sources of information that exist, and country profiles on Amnesty are usually more related to human rights than anything else. But it's definitely very helpful. Yeah, it's definitely a good idea. It's definitely a very smart thing to do. Definitely look up your country's position on different human rights issues and like what they've done in the past about human rights on amnesty.org. That's a great idea. I can't think of any reason you'd not want to do it. If you say something wrong and somebody catches you, will your points be cut? So, I mean, obviously we want to see good factual accuracy. Like saying lots of incorrect things is obviously going to reflect poorly on you with the chair. But it's not incredibly, so it's not an incredibly bad thing to do. Like everybody makes some factual errors. Even the best delegates do. I probably have in the past. No speech is completely perfect, and we're not gonna attack you for like making some minor errors. If you say something dramatically wrong, then that's probably a bad idea. Like if you say that, like, for instance, something like Nepal has very heavy nuclear, like has a very well developed nuclear weapons program, for example. That's extremely incorrect, and you shouldn't say that, and that will reflect poorly on you. But I think that most of you are smart and probably won't make super obvious errors like that. So, other questions? Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. How can a delegate be more diplomatic? So this is a great question. So a delegate can be more diplomatic by, so when we say diplomatic, we don't mean that you should just agree to everything everybody says and just like let people push you around. What we mean is that if you disagree with somebody, be firm and be polite, but don't be aggressive. Don't like attack them or yell at them or insult them or do anything you wouldn't want somebody to do to you. Be nice and clearly explain why you disagree with somebody if you do disagree with them. And well, so the hard part of diplomacy is learning how to disagree with people. Well, obviously if you agree with somebody, you're going to be naturally great to them and perfectly diplomatic. That's not a problem. But if you disagree with somebody, I would recommend, so the crux of diplomacy is like disagreeing in a polite manner. That's essentially it. So, what is foreign policy? So, foreign policy is essentially your country's overall stance on different issues. So, for example, the United States feels strongly that Israel it so for example, the United States supports Israel. It supports Israel over Palestine. There's a conflict between Israel and Palestine, and the United States is on one side of that conflict, right? It almost unilaterally supports Israel. And in a Model UN conference, when you are a delegate of the United States, for example, you also want to support Israel because that is what an actual delegate of the United States at the actual UN would do. Foreign policy is basically how well you can pretend to be a delegate of your country. So, if you're the delegate of the USA and you want to pretend to be an actual delegate of the USA, you should certainly follow the United States foreign policy, which is support for Israel, and other well, among other things, of course. So why don't we get to use laptops? Um, so at ILMUNC India, we just want to keep things fair. We want everybody to have an equal chance. And if some delegates have internet connected laptops but others don't, that's obviously going to be a disadvantage for the delegates who don't. It's it's just going to be an overall kind of unfair thing to have happen. Um, and we'd also like that delegates focus on what's going on in committee. And laptops are obviously pretty distracting. Like I'm kind of addicted to my laptop. Like if most delegates had laptops during committee, they'd focus a lot less on the committee itself. So that's our two essential reasons for not getting to use laptops. So a lot of questions have been popping up about like the best delegate awards and awards in general and points and how awards are determined and whatnot. So this is kind of a touchy subject, but I think that awards aren't the most important thing in a Model UN conference. What's more important are the learning outcomes and like so and this obviously sounds pretty tacky to a lot of you. Like you're like, oh god, yeah, sure. Awards aren't important. I believe that. No. Awards are genuinely not as important as a lot of you think they are. Like a lot of the benefit that I've achieved from Model UN has been like in my everyday interactions or in like events with like employers and stuff like that. It what Model UN does is it boosts your speaking and your interpersonal skills. It just makes you a more eloquent, more confident overall person. So and that's much more valuable than a best delegate award. When you're like 20 years from now, you're not gonna care about like what award you won at ILMUNC India. You're gonna care about like how professional and like eloquent and confident of a person you are, and that's what Model UN builds. But of course, awards are nice, right? It feels good to win, and that's why we have them to like motivate delegates to put in as much effort as they can. So to be the best delegate that you can be and like put yourself in a good standing for awards, I would recommend the following. First, you need to speak well. You need to speak as confidently as you possibly can. You need to make concise speeches that are packed with information. Secondly, you need to give constructive solutions to the topic at hand and move the committee forward. You can't just keep attacking other delegates. Like even if you do attack other delegates for like things they say that are against your country, don't constantly attack other delegates. Definitely give constructive solutions and like ways that the committee can achieve its purpose, which is to solve the topic at hand, as opposed to just like endlessly debate it. So a delegate who moves committee forward and speaks well is definitely in the contention for winning an award. Um, I'd also recommend trying to speak as often as you can and like being as dominant with your speeches as is possible. So every 10 so naturally in GAs or Ecosocs it's pretty difficult to always speak, right? Because there are a lot of delegates and the chair isn't always going to be able to recognize you. A lot of the times in GAs people speak like twice during a day. So the important thing is whenever a chair asks you to raise your placard, you should have your placard in the air with a great speech right there in front of you waiting to go. And so whenever the chair does call upon you, you absolutely crush the speech, and you do a great job. And another really important thing for like awards, at least, and again, awards are not the most important thing. Um, is that you should convince other delegates of your ideas in unmoderated caucuses and try to come up with a very good resolution or working paper, um, and like contribute to other delegates' resolutions or working papers in a manner that like helps the committee. And if the chair sees that the like leadership that like you're helping other people collaborate and like create a good resolution, he's gonna appreciate it, or she. Um, Okay, so somebody says you won't get a best delegate award unless the committee is a success. Mm, that's actually wrong. So I know in some committees in India and Pakistan, it's more popular that like if the committee is a failure, nobody gets a best delegate award. That doesn't happen here. We will give you a best delegate award even if the committee fails. That doesn't mean that the committee should fail though. We don't want the committee to fail. You want to you want to make sure that the committee does well and like achieves its end goal as well as possible. Okay, more questions. Uh, what are the minimum essentials of research? Okay, so this is kind of a double-edged sword. You obviously want to prepare as well as you can for a Model UN conference. But if you find yourself in such a situation that you have like only a few days left to prepare, and you have a lot of work to do and don't really know what the committee is about, your minimum essentials would be, in my opinion, reading the background guide, writing a solid position paper, and reading about your country's general stance on different issues on like the UN website or like news articles detailing how your country acts or like just or the CIA or Amnesty International profiles of your country. That would be the bare minimum. And if you want something even more minimum than that, there's just the background guide. Just at least read the background guide for sure. That's gonna help you a lot. Okay. Um. Okay. So should we bring any electronic guidance to the committee? No. Well, you can bring them. You just can't use them. That's basically it. Somebody says that the press will come to hunt you if you're doing really well. That's not true. We don't have press questioning like you do in a lot of committees in India. There will be no head of press questioning you. There will be no aggressive questions that like make you feel scared and force you to think of like quick responses on the spot. That won't happen. The press at ILMUNC India is just there to make the delegate newsletters and stuff like that. It's not there to question you. It will question you about your experience in the committee though, and like ask you things like, "How are you enjoying conference?" or "What's going on?" But it won't, but they won't question you. So that hopefully that answers Pratish's questions. Okay, so how should we research? Um, well, like I said, go through your background guide at first. Proceed to read the citations at the end of the background guide. That those are the sources that the chair used when he was developing the background guide. And finally, read news articles and like reports about the agenda that your committee is going to is yeah that your committee is going to discuss and like things related to your country. So, to clarify on the contents of a position paper, so it's just your so overall, a position paper is your country's stance on the topic. The specific format that ILMUC uses, well, it's on the website, and if it's not, just use any format in general. But the important thing is that it details what your country thinks of this agenda and like what actions it would like to see taken in committee and like what your country has done in the past about this topic. Should we use complex words in a position paper? You don't have to. No, you don't have to at all. So, are there any further questions? Any last minute questions? I know the connection here isn't great. I'm not sure why. I think there are a lot of people on this chat room. So, okay, so Midnight Crisis is the Midnight Crisis only for selected delegates. The Midnight Crisis is a surprise. You don't need to worry about that. We'll talk about that sometime. Like, that's gonna be a surprise in committee. Okay, like during the conference. You don't need to worry about that yet. Yes, Faraz is correct. It's only for particular committees. From where do we get our preambulatory clauses? Well, there are guides on the internet which detail like what clauses are good preambs. And yeah, you have to make your own preambulatory clauses. You can't get them before committee starts, naturally. Alright, so it's about 9:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Philadelphia. I'm currently at Penn right now, and I'll be heading over to India soon. And hopefully conference will be great. Can we bring printouts? You can bring printouts. Alright, so I'm winding this up. Thank you guys. This has been a very productive session. We've seen some very good questions. This is a huge chat bar. And if you guys want to watch this later, this whole thing is being recorded. So, remember that. Anyway, see ya. Enjoy your preparation. Okay, so last question by Daniel. How much time do we get to interact with the Quakers? The Quakers are the name for Penn students. You can interact with us whenever you want. You just have to show up, and you can just show up after committee, and we'll talk to you. Anyway, thank you everybody, and have a good night, or good morning for me at least. And thank you everybody.